You have one of those swipe phones? You like those swipe phones? I hate them. You touch them, everything disappears. You like that? I don't like that. I hate that. When I borrow somebody's swipe phone, you can hear me repeatedly say, remind me to tell you how much I hate this phone. I hate this phone. I'd smash this if it were my phone. I'd smash this phone. Do you know how many of those I'd smash if I had one? Yeah, swipe phones. I still have the flip. The flip. Concrete. You press the button and you get the thing. You get what you want by pressing the button. I'm a button presser. I come from that generation. You press the button, you get what you want. Yeah, you got to count 3 letters through the alphabet every time. You got to go, base 3 to type a word. But you get the word you want, and the person that's getting your message gets the word you want. Flip phones. Remember when you used to do that? Finish the phone call, tell somebody off, you're done. Flip phones. I was raised by the church. Anybody go to church? Were you raised by the church? Well, I was. Our church was different than every other church on the planet. This I promise you. There was no priest. There was no pastor. It was anarchy, the church of anarchy. No, actually, we'd all show up every Sunday morning by 9:45 a.m., sit down in our plywood chairs, real plywood. They were about this wide, this high. When you're a little kid, like Lily Tomlin, you sit with your feet sticking straight out in front of you. So your feet are right in front of you. And you're peeling away the plywood. It's wearing out, so you pull on it and you get pieces of it. You pull it off in church. In between your Cheerios and raisins that you're eating out of little baggies. Your mom would give you little baggies of Cheerios and Lucky Charms. You'd only eat the marshmallow part. And raisins. And stick pretzels in church. Because in our church, nothing much happened. It was very quiet. When you sat down, it was quiet. When you stayed in your seat, it was quiet. There was no kneeling, no standing. The only time anybody said anything was when one guy would stand up and pray. Then you'd close your eyes. And it was always questionable. Were you allowed to finish your pretzel if somebody was praying out loud? Well, then somebody might call a hymn out of these tiny little hymn books we had. They were like flip phones, little black leather hymnals. We'd open them up, no music in them, just the words. And somebody with a halfway decent voice would start the song and everybody would sing it, all the verses. And Mom sat next to me. She had a hearing loss in one ear. And so every verse would get a little bit slower and a little bit lower. Mom was always a little bit slow on the uptake. But we'd sit there. We'd sit there for 45 minutes. We'd sit there. So those little Hanna-Barbera books that you could get at the clothing store where they sold socks and Catholic school uniforms. Yeah, those little flat little books. Mom would have a stack of those, and so we'd be able to sit and read our little Hanna-Barbera books and eat our pretzels and Lucky Charms. When we were toddlers, I was 3, 4. But I used to prefer, after finishing those books, which took all of 5 minutes, to watch the people. And I got really kind of professional at it. I would watch the people sitting in silence. And when people aren't talking, there's an awful lot to observe about them. How do they sit silently? What makes them the same? What makes them different? The women wore hats, pillbox hats, little nets with little fuzzies on them that looked like moles, hairy moles all over their hair, hairy moles on the hair, on a net, on their heads. You'd watch the backs of their heads, and then you'd watch the one sitting in the middle, in the square, toward the center of the room, because there was a table in the middle of the room with a linen tablecloth on it. And the linen tablecloth was over the top of two items that were sitting on that table. One of them was a glass carafe of Mogan David, and the other one was a silver plate. And on that silver plate was a loaf of bread that was baked every week by Mrs. Riblet. And under the table, on the shelf on the bottom, was a basket, a woven basket. So we'd sit. There'd be a prayer. There'd be a hymn from the little leather hymn book. And then right around 9:45, one of the men would walk to the table and lift the linen tablecloth off of the table and fold it up and set it aside and pray. But before he prayed, he would take the loaf of bread and break it in half, set the two halves back on the book, on the plate, and pray. And after he was done praying, that plate would be passed around the room. And that warm smell of dough, freshly baked that morning, would come past my nose, and everybody would take a tuft of it. Everybody except the children. Put them in their mouth, close their eyes, sit silently. And then in a few more minutes, the same man would go back to the table, take the carafe of wine, and take the silver goblet, which was also on the table, and pour the wine into it after he prayed over it. And that goblet would come past our noses every Sunday morning at 11:45, and everyone would take a sip of it. Dad, when he took his sip, would always put his lower lip over the lip of the glass, over the mug, over the silver goblet, because he learned when he was a rambler that was the sanitary way to drink out of a cup. You put your lip over the cup, and then the liquid comes into your mouth, and you don't have to lick your lips. You just wipe it off later. But you wouldn't have to swipe it off. There was no swiping. Nobody took anything. Everybody put their money in the basket when that got passed around. And nobody took anything. They just gave. No swiping. If you had a little baggie of, Cheerios, they were yours. Nobody took any from you. I grew up believing that, what belonged to you, you got to keep. And that you could believe what anyone told you. It was called the truth. And we believed it. We called it the truth, and we believed it, because the truth was what you could believe. And everybody told it. And lived it. At least on Sunday morning at church, where I was raised.